James here with the Oracle Outlook for the week starting April the 29th, 2019. Thanks so much for tuning in and joining me for this week's video reading. But before we get to this week's video reading, I want to once again take a moment to acknowledge those of you who have recently subscribed to the channel. Again, over the past week or two, I noticed another uptick in subscribers. So I want to take this moment to officially welcome you to the channel and saying thank you so much for taking that step to subscribe. But as I always say, whether you are a subscriber or a long-time regular viewer, I can never do what I do here without any of you out there tuning in and watching. So thank you one and all for your continued support and encouragement of both myself and the channel. This week I wanted to work with tarot because it's been a while, and also too because I've been getting a lot of tarot decks that I backed on Kickstarter and Indiegogo. They are starting to arrive in the mail, so that always excites me. And one of those projects is a tarot deck I backed on Indiegogo. It was called the Trippin' Waite Tarot. It is by James Battersby and Christine Aguilar, and I'm really excited to work with this because it is a standard Rider-Waite tarot deck. So if you are familiar with that tradition, that school of tarot, so to speak, you will love this deck. The thing that makes it very interesting, at least for me, is that it has a 60s psychedelic vibe or feel. And so one of the reasons why I wanted the deck is because I am actually a product of the 60s. I was born in 67, so I grew up in the late end of the 60s and the beginning of the 70s, where that psychedelic vibrational frequency kind of energy was going on, right? And so it brought me back to my childhood. So that was one of the reasons why I really wanted to work with the deck, besides of the fact that, you know, I liked the images the way they looked. So again, we are going to be working with the Trippin' Waite Tarot by James Battersby and Christine Aguilar, and I will be leaving information on the deck in the description box below so you can check out more about it, or if you feel like you like it based on what you see in the video reading, then you could check out how you can purchase it and add it to your own tarot collection. So now that I've set things up, let's now move closer to the table, take a closer look at the table, at the cards that are going to be making up this week's video reading. And here we are with the cards on the table. I'm going to take a few moments to shuffle the deck. And as I do, I'm focusing on my usual intention for these weekly general readings. And that is, we are asking the cards for the information, for the insight, for the guidance, for the advice that's going to be most helpful and beneficial as we move through the upcoming week. Alright, I'm feeling one more time will be good. Now I'm going to go ahead and cut the deck. Now I'm going to fan the cards out. And I'm feeling like I want to do a line of 5 with tarot this week, so I'm going to do that with 5 cards. I'm looking for 5 cards in the fan that are getting my attention. This card 3, card 4, and the 5th and final card is over here, card 5. So these are the 5 cards. I'm going to take the remainder of the deck up, and I'll put that to one side. And now I'm going to spread the cards out. Alright, and so just as I normally do when I do a line of 5 reading, I always like to look to the middle card first For me, the middle card represents a central issue or something that we're being asked to focus on for the week ahead. And taking a look at the card we have, here we have the Seven of Wands. So Wands is a suit for me that can represent work and business. It can represent creative endeavors. So if it's not work and business in the literal sense, this could just be something that we are putting work and effort into, right? The number 7 can represent spirituality, so there may be a spiritual emphasis on that, or that we are putting work and effort into improving something. That's what the 7 means for me here. The 7, and when I work with a Rider-Waite type deck, corresponds to the Chariot, so this is about the path to victory. So if we're wanting to achieve some victory, there may be some work and effort on our part in order to make that happen. Wands is a suit of intention and action. Intention and action go hand in hand, right? So you can set an intention, but you have to ask yourself, what are the actions that I'm willing to take that are in alignment with that intention, right? So there's that. Now, when this card comes up specifically for me, the first thing that comes to mind is that there may be a situation in which we are needing to stand up for ourselves. This card can represent being assertive and aggressive. So it's just about standing up for yourself. And when I say assertive and aggressive, I mean it in the positive sense, right? It's not that we are being nasty and we are being cruel, intentionally cruel to other people. Being assertive and aggressive means standing up for yourself. This is a card about empowerment, right? So how can you empower yourself to stand up for yourself, right? To assert yourself if and when necessary. That's one meaning of the card. Another meaning of this card for me can represent self-employment. So if you are considering self-employment, or you are a self-employed person already, this card bodes well for you because you're being asked to move forward with that if you're thinking about moving in that direction. Remember, this is the sign 7, which corresponds to the Chariot, which is about the go-ahead, the path forward, the path to victory, right? So this card is giving you the go-ahead to move forward with your self-employment plans, right? If you are self-employed and you may be in a space, if you're having some sort of challenge, now if you look at the image, this clearly can look like a card of challenge, right? We have the figure on the card who appears to be on a hill and standing up or defending himself against the 6 other wands that are coming at him, right? So this could just be a matter of, fending things off, being in a position of defense or needing to defend yourself. But in the case of business, when this comes up, this card usually can suggest like you've been fighting the good fight and you may be questioning whether or not you want to continue with your self-employment venture. If that resonates with you, this card is advising you to not throw in the towel, right? This card would be about not throwing in the towel. So if you've been thinking about it, you may want to give that option a rethink. Because again, this card is about not throwing in the towel and not giving up. So now that could be the general message. If we are faced with challenges this week, because this card can represent facing challenges and adversities, if we are faced with challenges and adversities, we're being encouraged to not only stand up for ourselves and assert ourselves, but not give up. Don't throw in the towel. Don't give up, right? So there's that. Now, if we're talking about self-employment, I already talked about that. It may be in the employment sense, somebody is thinking about moving up the ladder. For me, this card can represent a leadership position. So this card can represent leaders, supervisors, bosses, because the figure on the card is standing at the top of a hill, right? So it just represents being on the top. So somebody may be contemplating moving into a leadership or supervisory position. And if that's the case, then this card is encouraging you to maybe figure out how you can kind of maybe separate yourself from the crowd, because this card can represent being a cut above the rest, right? So in what way are you different, or what makes you unique in terms of maybe all the other people who may be competing for the same type of position, right? And I'm looking at the image, and here we have, what looks to be like bees or wasps and a hive, right? So this would be about maybe being the leader of the hive, so to speak, or the leader of the collective, right? That kind of thing. Now, if we go with the idea about asserting yourself and standing up for yourself, that kind of thing, and not giving up, then this card is about like I'm looking at the bees or the wasps here, and actually dealing with or fighting off the stings of life, maybe something of a stinging nature, and having to fend that off, right? But you can do it. This card says you can do it. Now, the one other aspect of this card for me when it turns up is that it can represent being a teacher or a student, right? So this card can represent learning. It can represent being tutored, being mentored. So for someone, there may be a focus on tutoring or mentoring or teaching. So you could be taking on the role as the teacher or the tutor, or that you could be in a place where you are needing to learn something from a tutor or a mentor or a teacher, right? The one last thing is that this card can represent also being a writer. So there may be somebody who's doing some writing. And if that's the case, it may be you just having to kind of fend things off in terms of distractions or other things that you would occupy yourself with so you can get your writing accomplished. So that's a lot to say about the Seven of Wands, but that is the card that's the focus this week. So now let's take a look at the surrounding cards because they're going to offer us maybe external influences or factors that may be playing a part or weighing in or contributing to what's going on with the center card. So now starting with the card on the far left, we have the Magician. Okay, so for me, the Magician is a major arcana card. So first and foremost, as a major arcana card, it carries more weight in a reading when it shows up. So this card is talking about something of an important issue or an important event. Now, first thing I usually think of with the Magician is job and employment. So if we're going with the idea that the Seven of Wands can talk about work and business, whether it's being an employee or self-employed, this card carries with it. It's about the right and perfect use of one's talents, one's skills, one's abilities. If we're talking about the person who's self-employed, this card is quite clear. This is about promotion. This is about marketing. This is about advertising. So it could just be a matter of if you are in a place where you're maybe contemplating moving on from the self-employment venture, like you're thinking about throwing in the towel, remember the Seven of Wands is urging you not to do that or give that a serious rethink. This card is all about how can you market yourself? How can you effectively promote or advertise or sell either your product or your services, right? So this card is about marketing, advertising, promotion. This card for me is the planet Mercury in astrology, so that's all about communication. So this is about effectively communicating what it is that you have to offer, right, to your market or to your demographic, right? If you're self-employed and you are selling a service, how can you promote that? This card is about your expertise, your specialty. So think about what is my area of expertise? What is it that I specialize in? This card is about not being a generalist, but being a specialist. So maybe if you've been looking at what it is that you're doing from a maybe more general standpoint, maybe this card is encouraging you to drill that down and become more specific and maybe settle on an area of specialty, a specialization, right? That kind of thing. Now, if we're talking about the Seven of Wands as a focus card, talking about, learning, teaching, being a student, then this could be a matter of, from a spiritual lens or spiritual perspective. Then the Magician is talking about learning something of a spiritual nature in terms of a talent, a skill, or an ability, right? And wanting to perfect that, wanting to become an expert or a specialist in that area. One of the spiritual practices that comes to mind with this card for me is going with the idea that this card can represent the spiritual principle of as above, so below. Then I sometimes see this as, being a channeler. So this could just be channeling spirit. So somebody may be doing that, and you're being encouraged, if that's the case, if that resonates with you, to write down the messages that you're getting, and that would be the Seven of Wands, right, as the focus, right? So it's about putting down the messages you are receiving in writing. Right? It could also be the process of automatic writing if I pair the two cards. Right? So there's that. So the Magician can represent channeling, could represent operating with the idea that what we manifest is based on spiritual law or spiritual principle. Right? And as I'm looking at the image on the card, I'm noticing the doves above the magician. So this could just be, what do we need to work on, remember, to come to some sort of peace about a situation, right? The 3 doves on the card, there's 3 of them. So for me, the 3 is a number of commitment, right? But it could also be, if we're talking about spirituality and one spiritual path, it could be some kind of spiritual tradition, right? One in which there is some kind of trinity, right? So like for instance, a trinity here could be like body, mind, and spirit. You know, in more traditional circumstances, this could be, you know, the Father, Son, the Holy Ghost, or the Holy Spirit, if you come from a Christian background, excuse me. You know, so, but whatever your spiritual path could be, it's about if there's some sort of trinity within that, it could be about working with spirit in that nature. Now, I'm a Christian metaphysician, so I tend to look at the doves representing the 3 aspects of mind. So we have the conscious mind, we have the subconscious mind, and we have the superconscious mind. Those are all aspects, because in my understanding of Christian metaphysics, God is mind. We call God divine mind, or one mind, or the universal mind, or infinite intelligence, right? So with that, the doves can represent the 3 aspects of mind, right? And having them work together, right? So that's just me giving some examples of ways that you could look at trinities maybe that are in alignment with your spiritual path, right? But first and foremost, with the magician, I think this is about using our talents, our skills, and our abilities. In the business sense, this would be about promotion. So advertising, promotions, marketing, communications, you know, some kind of area of expertise or specialty. If it's, you know, you're on the job and you're thinking about moving up the ladder, remember I talked about the 7 of Wands being about a leadership position or a supervisory position, then that is another way in which you have to market and promote yourself, right? If you're wanting to move up the ladder, you're in essence, you're selling yourself, right? And so how can you sell yourself in a way that the company or the organization realize what an asset you are to that company or organization, right? So either way, if you're moving up the ladder or you're promoting your own business, this is about you selling yourself. And you're selling yourself from your place of expertise and specialty. So that is the magician. Oh, the one last thing that I want to say is that, playing on the word magician, this could just be a matter of putting work and effort into creating magic in your life, right? Or that you are really getting connected, if we go with the idea that the magician is connected to spirit, that you are connected to seeing the magic of spirit or the universe, whatever you language the divine, you're seeing the magic of that at work in your life, right? So there is that with the magician. Now, taking a look at the card in between the magician and the 7 of Wands, we have, oh, interesting. So here we have the 7 of Swords. So now the first thing that I want to say here is that we have 2 cards that are numbered 7. So 7 is a repeating number. So here we have, again, the emphasis on one's spiritual nature, one's spirituality, or something having to do with putting some work and effort into improvement, because those are all aspects of the 7 for me. Again, now the 7 is emphasizing the Chariot as the major arcana card it's connected to. So this is about the path to victory, moving forward, right? In this particular case, the 7 of Swords can talk about gathering information. The swords can represent ideas, information, and this card can represent gathering information. This is about doing some research, you know, investigating something, those kinds of things, right? So there is that. So if we are in a process of moving something forward, it could just be a matter of, the first thing we might need to consider is, do we have the information? And if not, where can we get the information that we need to move things forward, right? I'm noticing too that this card can also, for me, represent doing something unexpected, right? So if we're taking a particular course of action, we may be inclined to want to try to do something differently, right? This card for me could suggest the idea like if you've been engaged in something and what you've been doing has not produced the result that you've been wanting or looking for or needing, then it could just be a matter of would you be willing to consider the idea of doing something differently. A different action might produce a different result. Right, so there's that to consider as well. This card can come up when somebody is thinking about changing jobs or careers. I call this the job change or career change card. So it could just be a matter, again, if somebody is doing that, and I'm seeing that if we go with direction, here we have the figure on the Seven of Swords moving away from the person on the Seven of Wands and toward the magician, even though he has his back turned and looking at the figure on the Seven of Wands. So this could just be a matter of a transition, moving from one place to the next, right? And so maybe we've been looking back at the past, knowing that we need to move on or move forward. And this card is giving us a heads up as to being willing to go ahead and take that step. This could just be about taking the first step, right? If you're wanting to make some progress, what is the first step? Remember, the 2-7 cards are connected to the Chariot, and so this is about the path to victory, but the Chariot is a movement card. So what would be the first step you need to take to move something forward, right? So I'm seeing this about gathering information, some research, that kind of thing. It's also about a job or career change, right? It could also be dealing with some kind of loss because this is known as the theft card, right? So it could just be a matter of if we're needing to stand up for ourselves, the card that follows it, it may come on the heels of some kind of loss, right? So those are aspects of the Seven of Swords. But the first thing that I notice is that the Seven is being repeated. So there's something about spirituality and improvement. Okay, so now let's take a look at the card on the other side here. And here we have, okay, so here we have the Six of Pentacles or the Six of Coins. So this card can come up when we are taking a look at, if we're talking about work, business, employment, then this card is about being of service. This card for me rules service occupations. So this could just be being of service, or if you are self-employed, then this card is about what is it that you have to offer those who need or in need, right? So this could be a product or a service, but it has to be something that people need, right? And so if we're talking about communication of that product or service, it's how can you communicate to the people who need it, or how can you communicate what it is that will best be served by using that product or service. What need does it meet? It could also be too, like if you're contemplating what to do with your business, like if you've been giving some thought as to whether or not you want to continue with that, this card is a matter of supply and demand. So it's just a matter of maybe giving it a rethink in terms of, is what it is that you're offering, does it meet a demand, right? Is there a demand for what it is that you need? And it could also be a matter of the value that the product or the service offers, right? The Pentacles are for me about what we value. So it could just be a matter of getting people to see what the value is in the offering that's being made, right? And that might be especially if it's a service rather than a product, right? A service may be more challenging to quote unquote sell, especially if it's something of an intangible nature, right? Where a product is a physical thing that people buy to do something specific with. But if it's a service, it may be something that is an intangible or has an intangible value, right? And so it may be hard to measure or quantify. I'm looking at the scales that the person is holding. It may be hard to measure or quantify, and that may be what the challenge is. You may have to put some thought energy into how can you effectively communicate what that value is, right? Now, if someone is thinking about moving up the ladder, because we did talk about that in terms of being a boss or a leader or supervisor, then this card can represent receiving a bonus or some kind of raise. So it could just be a matter of compensation. needing to be discussed with that moving up the ladder, right? Because this card again can represent a raise in pay or a bonus, but this usually represents money changing hands. If you're a self-employed service provider, then this is about you maybe taking a look at how much you are charging for your services, right? Or your product, right? How much are you, what's the price tag on it, right? Because you want to maybe make sure that people can meet that price point, and if they can't, it may be that you're communicating to the wrong market, and you may need to rethink who it is that you are really selling to, because it may not be the current market or client base that you have, right? And it could just be a matter of, this is coming to me in the moment, it may be for someone who's a service provider that you may need to give yourself a raise and raise your fees and your rates in your pricing. Give yourself a raise and do that. And you may have to inform your current client base that you are raising your rates effective, at some point in time. And you get to decide when that is, of course. But this card would make me feel like money, it's about money changing hands. Now, if we are talking about the idea here about standing up for yourself and asserting yourself outside of work and business, because I spend a lot of time talking about that, but it may be something you have to work on, right, in the business of your life, then coming on the heels of the Seven of Wands, this card talks about our relationships, right? And if you notice, we have an interesting dichotomy here. We have the person who's standing, giving to those in need. We have somebody who's a giver and somebody who's a taker or a receiver. In our relationships, this has to be in balance, which is the scales, right? We are equal parts giving in our relationships and receiving in our relationships. This is about the spiritual law. Now remember, I talked about the idea of spirituality with the 2 sevens, and the magician being about, the as above, so below when it comes to universal principles or spiritual principles, right? This is about the universal law of giving and receiving, and it always has to be in balance, right? So this card is about like the energy that you put into a situation, you get back. But in our relationships, we have to be really mindful. We have to be very careful that we are not either always giving, because this card can represent being a giver and having a giving, generous nature, or always on the receiving end. There needs to be some balance, right? And so we need to take a look at our dynamics or how we're contributing to the energy of our relationships this week. Are we always giving and we're having a hard time receiving? If that's the case, then you're being given a heads up to learn. Remember, Seven of Wands is about learning. Learn how to be on the receiving end. And it could be as simple as receiving a compliment. If you receive a compliment and your first go-to response is to say something like, if somebody compliments what you have on and the first thing you say is this old thing, you are not receiving the compliment, right? And if you're always on the receiving end of something, would you be willing to take some time to be giving this week? This card can represent being a volunteer, doing something that has to do with charities, a donation. This could be about donating your time and your energy and your resources into something. But it's like if you find that you are operating on one side of the giving or receiving spectrum, would you be willing to kind of reverse that and go with the opposite? So if you're comfortable giving, see how you react to receiving this week. And if you're always receiving, or it seems like you're always on the receiving end of something, see how it would feel to be on the giving end this week, right? But this card is also about, or just the general idea about equal energy exchange, right? Again, this is about the law of giving and receiving. Now, I also talked about, I thought I was done. I talked about, again, with the magician, about universal and spiritual principles. Besides the universal law of giving and receiving, this is about the law of attraction. This is a law of attraction card. So this could just be a week where if that is your thing, if that is your jam, then paying attention to seeing how the law of attraction is at work in your life, right? So that is the Six of Pentacles. And so now let's take a look at the last card in the line, rounding things out for this week's reading. We have, okay, so here we have the Eight of Swords. Okay, so the first thing that I notice is that we have two swords cards this week. So swords, again, represents information. It represents communication. It represents ideas. It represents the way we think. So this could just be paying attention to the thoughts that are running through our minds this week. Swords can also represent lifestyle. So this could just be about paying attention to maybe lifestyle choices or changes this week, right? Because again, swords are the ruling suit. The second thing that I noticed is that we had the Seven of Swords and now we have the Eight of Swords. So now here we have a change in value. We have an increase. So interestingly enough, now that I'm talking about that, we have a 6, we have 2 sevens, and we have an 8. So there's something about whatever the situation is, if it's a particular specific situation, we may be moving through the midpoint of the situation as we're reaching towards a state of conclusion, or we're moving towards a state of conclusion just by the numbers in the sequence, right? But here in the Eight of Swords, we have a very interesting depiction. Here we have a person who's tied up, right? So if we go with the idea this is talking about mental activity, this card could be talking about, for some people, there may be a situation in which there's nothing that you need to physically do because she's tied up, right? So I always go with this card meaning like my hands are tied, right? So it could just literally mean that there's no action you need to be taking other than maybe mental energy, right? And so that would make sense with the Seven of Swords talking about, gathering ideas, information, doing some research or analysis. This would fit that meaning, like there's nothing physically I need to do. I'm in the process of gathering information, right? And the reason why is because we want to move forward. Remember, we had 2 sevens talking about the path to victory, right? With the Chariot emphasis underlying there, right? This card is talking about, I want to move forward, but I'm not sure about what my next step might be. And if that's the case, then it's about gathering information that would better help you move forward, right? Because the woman is blindfolded on the card, meaning I can't see my way forward, or I can't see what my first step is, that kind of thing, right? Another thing with this card is that if we're talking about the Seven of Wands, being the focus card here, about maybe the possibility of not throwing in the towel, maybe standing up for ourselves, asserting ourselves, that kind of thing, then this card is about maybe things that would be interfering with that. If you're wanting to move forward, if you're wanting to make some progress, then this card is asking you to consider what are the things that could be interfering with that. For me, this is the interference card, right? So it's about taking a good look, and the blindfold would be not being blind, not being in denial, not being unwilling to see what it is that could be interfering with you moving forward. Now, this card can also be talking about prisons, right? So sometimes for me, I talk about it in the sense of that this may be a prison of our own making. So it could just be a matter of the ways that we mentally keep ourselves imprisoned in a situation, especially if it's one that's not working for us. It's not serving us, it's not supporting us, right? And so this may be a week where we have to take the blinders off, so to speak, and be willing to see what's actually going on. In that sense, the 8 is a number for me that represents personal power. So this could just be ways that we are really having to be honest with ourselves about looking at how we choose to give our power away, right? And sometimes it could just be a matter of not taking a particular course of action, maybe something that we know we need to do and for some reason we're not willing to do it. That could be a way of, downplaying or giving away our personal power, right? So there's some thought we're being asked to put into that possibly. I'm taking a look to see what else I want to say about this card, right? Oh yes, so it could just be a matter of also too, maybe going back to the idea about our relationships with other people this week. There may be a situation in which we may want to take some action to support somebody or help somebody, but there may be something going on in our own lives that is preventing us to do that. And here's the thing. If we go with the idea that everything is in accordance to spiritual law or spiritual principle or something of that nature, there may be something higher at work going on. Your situation that's preventing you from stepping in could be because on some level there's nothing you are supposed to do with that situation, right? If a person needs help or assistance and you can't offer that, it may be because you're not supposed to be the one to help the person out, right? Now, as I'm looking at the Six of Pentacles, and I talked about this idea about giving and receiving in our relationships and making sure that everything is about balance, everything being equal, then this card could suggest that we are taking a look at that and wanting to move beyond that. We have been maybe stuck, limited, or restricted in a relationship in which there has been some sort of inequality, and we're wanting to, move through that or move beyond that. So I'm seeing that with the Eight of Swords. Again, for me, this is about wanting to move forward and taking a look at how we can get the information that would best allow us to do that. And so again, this could be in a working context or it could be in a relationship context, right? Moving beyond the things that we think are interfering in our lives, the interference, or that are keeping us stuck to some degree. So that is the Eight of Swords. And on that note, I will go ahead and round out this week's Oracle Outlook. I'm James Himm Mitchell, and as I close, I'd like to thank you for sharing space here with me for this week's reading, and I look forward to sharing the same space with you again in our next video reading together. So until then, I'm hoping that you have a wonderful day, and I'm hoping that you have a very tarot-tastic week. Take care.